This is Paul Wexler, and you're listening to No Good Music.
It's cold this Sunday morning. My shoes are wet with dew. Drizzle around, I don't make no sound. Gliding past those hookers too. Some kids are slanging, they are hanging, but fall right at the view. Miles past, they don't last. All I see is you. I'm trembling early in the morning, trembling over you.
We have a special guest with us today. He's a producer, singer, songwriter, pianist. His band WexWax recently released their debut album, Swept Away. And let's welcome to No Good Music, Mr. Paul Wexler. The crowd goes wild. You're in California, correct?
That's right. My wife and I moved from New Jersey to the Bay Area years ago because her younger daughter had a baby, which we have had the pleasure of taking care of one day a week for the last 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a time out here. And I just go back to New York and perform like a few times a year. So I still get to keep up my New York shows.
Okay. Now, are you from New Jersey? Are you from California?
I'm originally from Long Island. I grew up on Long Island, and but have lived all over. You know, I've lived in Manhattan, I've lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in San Francisco. I've spent time in Florida. You know, I've been in a lot of different places.
And you lived near the Clinton area at one point.
That is correct. That is correct. 9/11. I pay really close attention to what people from the agency and former people from the agency say. And some of them were dropping hints that they thought there was going to be another thing after 9/11. No, they didn't say it publicly, but they kind of hinted around it. And so I moved out of Jersey City and moved out, you know, because I was like, okay, I don't want to be this close if there's another thing. Because where I lived on the Palisade, I walked over from my house, a very short walk to the edge of the Palisade where I could see Tower number 2 had fallen and Tower number 1 was still burning. And it's something I actually wish I had never looked at.
Yeah.
Because it's an image that I'm not that fond of.
I don't think anybody forget, even if you didn't live in that area, you know, just horrible. I was working that day, and
I remember it clearly because I was helping a band in North Carolina. They were a jam band called Bessie Mae's Dream, of very talented musicians, and I got them some radio play and stuff, and a bunch of gigs. I booked them into 70 shows over the course of a year down in the Carolinas and Virginia. But I was doing a poster for one of the shows when the second plane hit. I was in a Staples, and I said out to no particular, we should have killed that Bin Laden when we had the chance.
Yeah.
Because I knew immediately that it was him. I'm very focused on this sort of thing. So,
do you remember meeting me at my print shop?
I do remember you. Looking
Years
at your
ago.
face, I remember.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
I think we talked briefly about music, and I told you I play guitar, but I don't play professionally. And you invited me to come to your house to jam, and I don't know, I wasn't comfortable because I'm not that great. So I never took you up
It
on
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You play the chords you know.
Yeah.
When I started out, I got myself this page of C chords. It was a full page of every potential C chord, not just the C seventh, but every diminished C chords and the augmented C chords and every possible one. And I figured out what each one was. And then I couldn't grab them yet, but I figured out what they were. And then I moved on to sharp D minor and went up the scale over the course of the next 2 months because I was determined when I started to have more musical knowledge than just with the basic blues chords. I watched this Keith Richards thing on Chuck Berry, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. I don't know if you've seen it. It's very entertaining documentary. It's worth watching. And there's a scene in it where Chuck Berry and his piano player go into this little studio and they record this song from the 40s, a Broadway song called A Cottage for Sale.
Hmm.
And but anyway, the point is, I thought to myself, wow, these guys who invented rock and roll, like Chuck Berry and a whole bunch of other guys in the 50s, they didn't have rock and roll to play when they first started because they haven't
Hmm.
invented it. So they knew all this material from a pre-rock and roll era. And I was determined to be able to master those songs because I want to have that same base of knowledge that these other guys had when they invented rock and roll.
Musicians always are influenced by, other musicians. So,
Oh yeah, no doubt.
those people like, Buddy Holly and Eddie Cochran and those, they were influenced by maybe blues, and I don't think rockabilly was pretty much maybe invented rockabilly, but
No, not yet. You know what?
yeah.
You'd be surprised these guys they could all play. Obviously country was an influence on people and that on rockabilly musicians, and people like
Yeah.
Hank Williams,
Hmm.
but anyway, I grew up listening to a lot of rhythm and blues because my father was one of the partners at Atlantic Records.
It'll be all right.
Oh, wait, I can hear Matt.
Yeah.
I can hear them. It's nice and clear. Do you know about?
Hold on a minute.
He's in, but he doesn't know he's in.
He's talking to something. Hold on. I just texted him.
Might be one of the options.
Hey, you there, Matt?
Don't you think?
Matt, I can hear you. Matt,
It is entertaining.
I can hear you.
What?
I could hear you. I
You can hear
your
me?
conversation. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Wow.
Yeah, whatever you did, you did it.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. You guys sound great. Nice. Paul, you got a great voice there.
If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Okay, like in school. I'm just telling
I don't get it. You're being funny, right?
you. In serious, no. Okay, so Paul.
But you can hear me.
Yeah,
You can hear me now.
Yeah. So Paul, you brought up your father. I wanted, if we could, talk a little bit about your father. And for our listeners, if you don't know, Paul's father was Jerry Wexler. It's a huge part of music history. He was a partner at Atlantic Records. He helped discover Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Led Zeppelin.
He did sign Led Zeppelin.
Also, he coined the term rhythm and blues, your father.
That is correct. Well, in the 40s, what we call the rhythm and blues charts now were known as the race charts. And they called these records race records. And at a certain point after World War II, that began to have an odor that was a little unpleasant. Mm-hmm. And the editor of Billboard, where my father worked at the time, he was a writer for Billboard, Paul Ackerman, who I was named after, said, we have to change the name of the chart. Mm-hmm. And my father just came up with it. Well, how about rhythm and blues? And I guess it stuck.
Wow.
Nice. So I imagine your father was a huge influence on you stepping into the, music industry, the recording industry.
The truth is that he was grooming my older sister, Anita, for the business. He wasn't really grooming me, although being around him was a form of trained. And just listening to him talk about music, he would play music all the time in the house. He would come home with the work from Atlantic and be checking it all the time. I mean, I remember when he came back from Muscle Shoals with a test cut, they used to call acetates, of Ever Loved a Man, the very first Aretha Franklin record. It was the first time I'd ever heard Aretha Franklin because I hadn't listened to her Columbia stuff or her gospel stuff before that. And I was completely shocked by the record. I was stunned by the record. And I'll give you another example of this. When I was very young in elementary school, they had folk singers come by and play like a lot of folky material, for us kids. And one of the songs played was Down in the Valley. And a few years after I heard this, my father cut a version of Down in the Valley with Solomon Burke. It's a great record. And I remember thinking, oh, this is what my dad did. He makes these songs that are pretty good, really good.
Hey, so for when you say folk, Was it kind of a country folk, that sort of thing?
No, I mean, there was a folk movement in the early 60s that was
Hmm.
very prominent. I mean, there were a lot of folk artists and there was a mixture of different things. There were artists like Leadbelly, with Goodnight Irene and that sort of thing. And then there were country influences in folk music, sea chanties. I mean, it was a really a huge influence on rock and roll. I mean, many of the San Francisco Bay Area groups like the Jefferson Airplane had folk roots, So it was, and the Bitter End in Manhattan was the major folk venue at the time. This is really before my time, and the truth is that although I was exposed to it, I was never really a folkie, because I was in the house. It was mostly rhythm and blues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a question here if he ever brought music home, and I thought the answer would be no. So that's really
I mean,
cool.
me? I mean, my father, no, he did all the time, and he was working constantly. He
Mhm.
worked round the clock. He was the first person I ever knew that in our neighborhood that had a phone with buttons instead of a
Uh-huh.
dial. First person that I knew in our neighborhood that had a multi-line phone in the house.
Hmm.
And he was running in the early 60s and the 50s the sales department and the promotion department, and also doing the daily op in the office and recording at night. I mean,
Wow.
his work ethic was unbelievable.
Mhm.
Wow. And is that on Long Island? Is that the home in Long Island?
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Well, I grew up in Great Neck. That was the
Hmm.
house where I grew up
Yeah.
in. So yes, yeah. So once I started about 13, I really started to buy records a lot when I was 13, and I started developing my own interests. And there were bands that were not on Atlantic, and were not R&B. Bands like The Who and The Doors and Jimi Hendrix. And so, like anybody, I developed my identity. I
Mhm.
just wasn't a copy of my father's identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all do that too. Yeah. We think about, ourselves, each person when you're developing that at age 13. And, Rob turned me on to a lot of things. This would have been 1977, 78.
I was lucky in '77 to be in England working with Van Morrison on the Wavelength record, and
Hmm.
I jumped to this. If you want, I can tell you. Well, let's go chronologically, though, if
Yeah.
you like. It's up to you guys.
It might be good for the listeners, puts it all together that way chronologically. Sure.
Well, I had one more question about your father is if he ever brought you to work, like bring
Not
the
that
work.
often. Again, it was my older sister that was at most of the sessions. Now, at a certain point, I made a decision that I was going to be in the music business. It was very late on. I was like 20,
Hmm.
19 or 20. I realized that I had ears, and I was like, oh, well, I guess you're fated to do it. And I thought to myself, you are going to get an enormous amount of crap from people for going into this business.
Yeah.
People are going to think you're an idiot. People are going to look down on you. You're going to get a lot of crap. And I said, well, you know what? That's the nature of life, and I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I never let it bother me. But I will say two things. One, when I was living in the Bay Area in 1975, I became friends with David Grisman. My father was working on an album. Now, what's the name of that artist? She had that big record, Betty Davis Eyes.
Oh, Kim Carnes.
Yeah, Kim
Kim.
Carnes. And he was working
Yeah.
on this. He was working on a record with her in Muscle Shoals. And he called me up and he said, do you know any mandolin players? And I happen to know David Grisman. And well, I just happen to know this guy
Hmm.
who's pretty good, And so we flew into Muscle Shoals and David did his part. And after I saw sessions in Los Angeles where he worked with Dr. John on the Gumbo record, which is one of the great New Orleans records. And I also work on one of the Dylan records in Muscle Shoals.
Okay.
So I was there later on for a bunch of his work as opposed to earlier on.
So let's talk about Van Morrison. 1978, it was his 10th studio album,
Well,
Wavelength. And you
let me
were,
go
oh,
sequentially. Let me go
okay, sure.
sequentially.
Sure.
I got a job working for Mo Austin to do quality assurance, to try to basically make sure the records didn't skip and that the cassettes didn't sound like they were underwater. And while it was challenging, it was a very isolated job. It was isolated from the important parts of the company. When I distributed the test pressings, I would have contact with other people in the company. And I called my dad and said, boy, it's pretty isolated down here in this job. And he goes, cream rises. That's what he told me, cream rises. So I thought, it took me a while, but I was a Grateful Dead fan. And there's this one show we used to trade from 1970 at Harper College, which is now SUNY Binghamton. And I thought to myself, if I could get a good copy of this from the Grateful Dead and put it out on Warner Brothers, I could sell millions of it. And so I made a deal. Well, first I went to Mo Austin, and he knew I was a fan of the band. So he said, you go do it, Paul. I think you can do it, which was very kind and generous of him. And so I met with Big Garcia. They were working on their concert film. And he said, wow, Paul, we were trying to figure out how to get the money to finish the record. And now here you are. And I met with Jerry a number of times in the past. And so I made a proposition. Give me this tape and we'll release it and I'll give you 70 grand and you can finish it. He said, great. Now, like the fool that I was, as green as grass, I gave him the money without simultaneously the tapes at the same moment. And I never got the tapes. And I called up their lawyer, this San Francisco lawyer named Hal Cant. And I said, Hal, what the, I don't know if I want to curse on the podcast. I said, what the heck? And well, I did use a swear word. And he goes, well, you know how they are, Paul. And so I was like, because they were sort of piratical a little bit. And even though hippies think they were all peace and love, they had a lot of edge to what they did and thought, as well as being, the epitome of the hippie band. And so I thought, well, I'm screwed here. I'm screwed. I don't have this money to give back to Mo Austin. What the hell? And then I just started going through the vaults. And I found this Dark Star, this studio Dark Star that no one knew about. And I put there what I thought of as the best of the Warner years and hired Rick Griffin to do the cover. Again, I'd never done any of this before. I had no input from the band or anybody. And I was 23. And I called the record What a Long Strange Trip It's Been. And the band is still selling it now 50 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it made 20 million. It sold a million copies initially at $20 a copy. It was a 3-record set. So I made the $70,000 back and then a couple of extra nickels.
Nice.
Yeah.
And at the time, and I got nothing. Literally, I just got salary, which was very little at the time, for doing this. And I realized that if you don't start like kicking and screaming, you don't get anything.
Yeah.
So listen to the Van Morrison Wavelength record, okay? Where one of the people at Warner is this product manager named Pete Johnson. He's like, hey, Paul, Van's trying to put together the Take record, and you did such a good job in the vaults with this Grateful Dead record. Why don't you work on it? And I go, great, working with Van Morrison, that's great. I'd love to do that. And so we started pulling all the tapes together, and we went to Brothers Studio, which was in Santa Monica, which was the Beach Boys studio. And I met Dennis Wilson there, which was like so freaking exciting, like the actual surfing Beach Boy, that was like, for me, it was a big deal. And he was way cool. I can tell you, it just had such charisma and coolness about him. And so we took all the tapes and we went to England to this studio in Oxfordshire that was owned by Virgin Records called The Manor. And it was in an English manor house where like the Lord Haha used to live, And so these people would spend extra money recording to when they're not recording to be in this manor house. I was like, to me, it seemed crazy. Why waste your money on that? But people had money and they wasted it. So Van, we put the first song on and Van goes in to sing it. Recorded years earlier. It was an outtake, never released, and it's in the wrong key. The key is outside of his vocal range, and so he goes, this is like whipping a dead horse. It could get very intense at times. And he walks out of the studio, and I thought, well, here we go. This is a disaster. He doesn't want to continue, and we've spent all this money. It's the same thought I always have. Here comes another disaster, and so. I thought about it for a minute, and when he was alone, I took him aside and I said, "Listen, Van, this might feel like you're spending Warner's money right now because you're in the red. The Warner Brothers was in the red after several years of unsuccessful records." And I said, "But with your catalog, meaning Moondance and St. Dominic's Preview, with your catalog, you are going to be in the black eventually, which means that the money we're spending now are coming out of your future royalties. We are actually spending your money." And I said, "Now, we got 6 weeks booked at this studio. And if I just cancel now, you're going to lose a bunch of money on nothing." I said, "Do something, record demos, but use the time. Don't just waste it. It's your time." And so we started woodshedding different editions, rehearsing and checking out different guys. I guess you'd say auditioning almost. And we ended up with a fantastic band. And he cut the Wavelength record there, and it was amazing. And there was this whole punk rock thing going on at the time that was very, very, I don't want to use the word threatening, but challenging to older English musicians. And it really ran in the punk rock movement. Like one time I met Ringo, and I was wearing a Ramones t-shirt. And he goes, "Oh, so this is the lot that's going to replace us then."
Right.
Ringo said.
Yeah.
So I went to see The Clash in 1977 in the Rainbow Theatre in London. And it was an amazing show. And I had a couple of tickets. And one of the staff from the manor there, this lady that worked there, the Scottish lady. And so we get back to the studio and Van goes, "How was it?" And I go, "Yeah, it was pretty good." And she goes, "What the hell are you talking about? Yeah, I fucking loved it. You wouldn't shut up about it all the way back from London." And so I didn't want to get him too antsy about it. So when he cut Wavelength, it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen an artist do in my life. The vocal came out of him like a force of nature. I mean, he got it in basically one take. I mean, the whole thing. I was like, and then when he finished the take, he ran across the top of the board and he kicked the empty tape box with this really hard soccer kick across the studio. He screamed out, "Fuck this punk rock shit. Like, I'm still great. I haven't superseded yet.
Yeah.
I'm still strong."
Yeah. What the clash, excuse me, the clash of draw from Van Morrison and what he's doing. And Rob and I would have gone from that rock scene, the classic rock scene, to experiencing, some of this alternative, and it wasn't called alternative yet, but the punk and then the new wave. I didn't have time for Van Morrison. That wasn't my path, and that's the divergence you're talking about, right?
Yeah, change but music is music. I mean, I got a couple of stories I got to do quickly. But my father recorded one of the first rock and roll records by Big Joe Turner called "Shake, Rattle, and Roll." It's a classic rock and roll record. But it was a black record. It was a rhythm and blues record. Rock and roll, in my opinion, started out as rhythm and blues. The great
agreed.
But a lot of my father's friends who were jazzers, like my father from the 30s, when they heard the record, they said, "What the hell is this? It's not music. There's nothing musical about it. It's a terrible record." In other words, the change is always shocking to people when it happens. It's always shocking. Now, when I was living in LA, I saw a whole bunch of bands that I promoted at Warner Brothers. I mean, I didn't have a position, but I would talk them up anyway. The Gang of Four, I know I had something to do with them getting signed. Devo, I talked up Devo a lot. And so I went to clubs all the time in the 70s in Los Angeles. And one of the bands I started seeing was the Go-Gos. A friend of mine, John Ingham, who had worked with Generation X and was the first person to interview the Sex Pistols in London for Sounds or maybe NME. He told me, he said, "These Go-Gos, you got it." And so I decided to take them into the studio. And we went to the Warner's Amigo studio where it's like James Taylor and Randy Newman and artists like that had been recording for Warner's. And the staff, they were scared of them because they were so punk rock back then. They really were punky. This is before their image was like glammed up for the, for public consumption.
We laugh at this because I didn't want to buy the Go Gos album, because of that reason. Yeah, right.
But you heard, but I sent you the single I did.
Oh, I've heard it. Yeah, I think even before you sent it to me, I knew about it. I knew about But I wanted to ask you, was this was their first time in a recording studio? Is this correct?
Yeah, first time in a recording studio,
okay.
Yes. And and it was great. So the record was released by Stiff Records, and it started to go up the dance chart because there's this thing called Rock Pool that would send records out to different dance clubs that would play rock-inflected dance music. And so it actually got to number 14 on the Billboard dance chart, this version, not the beat. And I called up Stiff Records. They had an office in New York, and I talked to this lady that was working there, and I go, do you know you're going up the dance chart with this record? And she goes, oh, I must go call Dave, which was Dave Robinson, who ran Stiff, who signed Elvis Costello and a whole bunch of great artists initially. They had no idea. They weren't working the record. It just went up on its own because of its own merits.
Wow.
Wow. So I would like to talk a little bit about my record, just a little bit, unless you guys have some other questions you want to get to.
Well, I was going to ask you one more thing, and then we'll get into your album. You sent me today an award, and I want to talk because that was around 1992, Stone Temple Pilots Core, and you got an award for, I think it was 1 million sales. Was it 1 million?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what happened.
Okay.
They got to the label, and the label had been the end of metal. Atlantic had been a big metal label in the 80s, and that was dying. And Phil Collins was king the label at the time. And so when Stone Temple Pilots showed up and did a showcase at the label, I thought, wow, these guys are great. This is like the first band where I'm like impressed by them in a long time at the label. And so I told them how much I liked them. And my job at the time, believe it or not, after making all the records, my job at the time was to write the promotional materials that went out to newspapers and radio stations and wherever, MT. And so I was interviewing the guys about the record. And I'd listen to the record, and I'd listen to the first single, that Sex Type Thing record, where Scott's going, I know, you shouldn't have worn that dress. And I'm listening to it, and I'm going, that's my image of Scott.
Yeah.
And I'm going, holy shit, what is he saying about this girl? She shouldn't have worn a dress. And it sounds like some crazy rape, like justifying rape. And so I asked them, I said, what's up with this song? What is this lyric about? And they go, we hate the guy that this song about. We revile him. And I said, okay. And I put that like very near the top of the bio, because it turns out that MTV was just about to reject their video because of that lyric. And so in my lowly position of writing this hacky fucking stuff to send out as material, I actually managed to help them.
Yeah. So to be clear, so that those words are referring to someone else that they
don't like. Exactly right. And that they revile.
Yes.
And that's what I put in their bio. And that's what actually it caused, I shortcutted this problem that was starting to develop already.
Yeah. Great.
And that's why they gave me the record. So, my attitude is always the same in the business. And within the capacity, as much as I can, I'm going to try to help the artists I'm working with,
Right.
Because what else is it about, really? I mean, you want your company to make, obviously you can't succeed without some,
and if you believe, sales. And if you believe in it, believe in the music, because like you said, you saw Stone Temple Pilots and you were like, this was the first band in a while I've seen that's really,
here's the thing.
Talking to
it's
me.
My job. It was my job to help artists, no matter what they were like.
Okay.
I mean, I wrote positive things about "Wind Beneath My Wings" by Pat Hitler. Okay, because it was on Atlantic, and it was my job to help. I'm not going. What am I going to say? I think this record is corny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. Women who love that song. Yes. There's people who love it. Yes.
Right. And you know what? Listen, if you want to be hierarchical about music, then we should all only be listening to Mozart, and that's that, So
Yeah.
I tend to not be hierarchical because
Mhm.
my opinion isn't any better than anyone else's, really. I don't see
Mhm.
myself like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
my taste.
I went out last night and saw a band. This is Stephanie Chow, and she's a composer, singer, saxophone player. She's not just a musician. So I'm watching her and four guys. They are all reading music. This
Right.
is jazz, classical brought together. It's so excellent. But
Yeah.
I'm like, that drummer, because I'm a drummer, that drummer is reading everything. That is so different than this other
Here's the
world
thing.
where
All
you
the
just
R-
play what you feel.
all the R&B charts on Atlantic in the 50s, all the records that were made in the 50s, like Shake, Rattle, and Roll, and all the Drifters records, Clyde McPhatter, all the hits in Atlantic, all the R&B 50s hits, many of which didn't cross over, were all charts. The sessions were all charted. Every single part was charted, believe it or not. That was the way they used to do it.
I can't imagine that. It's just, I don't read music and I don't play that way. So I'm not a jazz musician. So yeah, that blew my mind. It's a different level. It's different.
Yeah. It's another way of approaching it.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about your music.
Let me just start that
Okay.
a long time ago now, over 20 years ago, I thought to myself, you've been running music in your head for your entire life and you can't deliver a single anything.
Mhm.
And I said, you were going to learn how to do it. And so I got myself a keyboard. I said, if you don't practice, it was a Yamaha $300 keyboard. It was not a great keyboard. And I said, but it wasn't a horrible one. And, if you don't practice this thing every day for at least an hour a day, you just quit. Just don't buy another keyboard, give it up because you're not serious. There's no point even trying to do it if you're not going to do it. But I did it. And then when you met me, those copies I was making out of different fake books were to go to a Little Brook nursing home up in the mountains from Clinton and to perform. Every week I performed a different set of standards of classic country from the 50s and 40s and other things from a lot of different things, but some very tricky songs, different kinds of material, a lot of classic country. And I did a different set every week for 10 years. Okay. And that's how I got myself together by having a place to fail in front of an audience. Yeah. And so over the years, I played in different people's bands in New York, and then I started my own material. I have musicians both in New York and out here that I perform with, and mostly in New York, to be honest with you. And I recorded out here the basic tracks with two California musicians, Robbie Bean on drum, Alex Baum on bass, and then a lot of different guys played guitar and Chris Bencio from the Uptown Horns was on saxophone, and they toured with the Stones.
He's a really good sax player.
I mean, there's a couple of great guys. Arno Hecht, also from the Uptowns, is very noteworthy. So the first single that we sent out was the song "We're Going for a Ride." I used an independent promotional app to send it out, and it got over 250 stations playing it worldwide. Wow. Okay. There was this World Indie Music Chart where it peaked at number 21, and it was on that chart for 2 months. And this other chart out of Milan for Europe with like 150 reporting stations, it peaked at number 19 on that chart, and it got like over 9,000 spins in 2-3 months. So I consider that to be like a considerable success, and I'm very pleased with the fact that what I did, enough radio guys saw it's good enough that they wanted to play it,
Yeah.
Yeah, and say that song again, song title again for us.
We're going for a ride.
Going for a ride.
Riding through a blasted escape, my honey. Broken machines are littered everywhere.
You sort of post-apocalyptic. I was trying to write a song about my feelings about COVID, and so I sort of wrote this song about this post-apocalyptic land that we were living in. It was sort of more like things really had fallen apart in this song, you know. And in the bridge, I go, a temporary problem needs a permanent solution as the far horizon draws near. I'm trying to say that there's problems that we're having right now that are so severe, like global warming and other things. But the song still has its own vibe. It's not a preachy or it's not it's not a lecture. It's a song.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
I think it's a fun album. I listened to it a couple times. I mean, one of my favorites is She Doesn't Love Him, which has, I'm hearing maybe a 60s kind of feel. And the saxophone, I love on that one.
Well, I can see in her eyes she doesn't love him, but still we remain apart. Though her eyes never shine the way they used to, she won't forget the day I broke her heart.
That's Crispin on sax. You know, when I wrote that song, I mean, I was playing a lot of Hank Williams at that time. I'm very heavily influenced by Hank Williams, and it's got sort of a Hank Williams vibe. But the thing that triggered the song, where there's this classic French movie called Children of Paradise, which is one of the great movies, and in it there's this artist who goes to the gangster nightclub and he sees the woman that he's fallen in love with, one of the most beautiful women in Paris, hang out with the most murderous gangster in Paris. And this guy who brought him into the nightclub goes, "You should stop looking at them because you're going to get yourself killed looking at the girl." And he goes, "But can't you see? She doesn't love him." So he thought he still had a chance. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write this song because that basic idea of someone, but I changed it all around. It's not a reiteration of the movie. It's like so many of the things that I write about a relationship that is either breaking up or has broken up. Because that just seems to be a very fertile ground for songwriting.
Now, are you always writing songs? Or sent me a song, I think last night, called
These Days.
It sounded like a demo. Maybe you were still working on it or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's me. It's a song demo. It's just me and the piano. It's what I'm going to use when I come to New York in September. I've got a show at the Parkside Lounge in Manhattan on Houston Street on the 29th of September. And then I've got another show on the 6th at Otto's, which is a bar club on 14th Street and Avenue B. And so I use these demos to show my band. When I send them out like a month before the shows, I send them material, both charts of the material and some MP3 of the material, and then then we rehearse and we get ready for this.
Then they add their parts, and they kind of feed off of that.
They get their idea of where it's going from.
So who else will you be playing with in those shows then coming up?
Okay, well, the first show on the 29th, my band consists of Annie Hussick, who's played with people and performed with people like Wilson Pickett and Darlene Love. She's a great bass player. And then Dave Dunn, a fantastic drummer. He's a really excellent drummer. Been on bands that had deals, and he's been in the New York music scene forever. Really fantastic. And my guitar player, Billy Pigeon, is a very bluesy guy. He everything about the blues, and it heavily inflects his playing. And then the saxophone player, the first night is Crispin, the CO, on the 29th, but he's busy on the 6th of October. So I have another guy playing with me, Robert Aaron, who's played with Blondie and a bunch of like major artists, and he is insanely talented. So I'm very, and also one of the nights on there's the ballad song on the album that I sent called Voices from the Harbor. And I don't know if you checked out the trumpet solo on there. The trumpet player Volker Getz, who's an extraordinarily advanced musician. He was trained by Stockhausen's son in Cologne, Germany. And so he's going to be sitting in as well. So I have a mixture of some very different things in my music. I like things to be raw. I like an element of rawness in music that I love. It's hard for me to love music that doesn't have an element of excitement and rawness, which is why I went for the punk rock thing. And guys probably will need to forgive for this, but also the hip hop thing. And then
you're kidding. He's kidding.
Whatever you like. I'm kidding. And it's all right. And then but I also am an admirer of some very advanced music, and so I like to mix it up, and not just have and have different things happening. Part of why I like to feel excited while I'm doing it. I also believe that it's all about excitement. If rock and roll isn't exciting, then what the hell is it? I mean, it's got to be exciting. That's what I'm always shooting for when I do a live performance.
Right. When people show, they do want to hear something a little different. They do want to see some authenticity and a couple mistakes. They want it something a little different. Yes. Nobody wants to go and see it all smooth and exactly like they expected.
I can't understand people who go see shows that people are lip syncing.
That's not music.
I mean that's very rare, I think, as far as rock and roll goes. But I have seen it. Look, but it's not my approach also is not just to avoid sterile perfectionism, which I don't think I'm good enough to achieve sterile perfectionism, but also to just be exciting. Start with 3 fast ones, or at least 2. I mean, be exciting. Don't just have it be like, I'm influenced. I'm influenced by early rock and roll artists like Little Rich, and a lot of material out of New Orleans by people like Alan Toussaint, where it was exciting, and then punk rock also was exciting. Rock and roll in the 60s was exciting. If you listen to like early Grateful Dead, they're fast and exciting. I mean, in other words, I just believe it has to be part of it. You can't leave that out.
Yeah. Hey, I'm thinking of this cassette tape that a friend of mine gave me, and he got it from his aunt, a generation beyond us. But it was a cassette of a recording of Led Zeppelin, and so the recording would have been somewhere probably in the UK in 1970, and I'm listening to it in 1978. After hearing, the first 4 Led Zeppelin albums or something, I'm saying this is different. The people are kicking back and they're silent, and after each song, they're applauding. But so it was such a different kind of rock performance, and also there were some renditions of, and I was feeling it being rhythm and blues, and not the. It was very different for me, even at age 14 there, or 13. I'm hearing back. Yeah.
I was lucky. I got to see Led Zeppelin in '69, and it was so fabulous. They really were amazing. And then I also saw their show in Tampa in '74, which was the biggest concert up that point.
I believe it.
in a single venue. The 69 show is a lot more exciting, although the 74 show was still great. And so, I mean, look, those first two records are so blues oriented, you know, and they are my favorite Led Zeppelin records, but that's because those are my roots. You know, I grew up hearing this material.
What do you remember from that 1969 concert? What's your feel or memories from
I mean, I remember on You Need Cooling, where he's bowing the guitar. It's so effing great, okay? The way he did it was so impressive, and the way the band brought it down and created this rhythm that was perfect for that part. It was, I mean, it was just amazing. The whole thing was amazing. I was, and they got bad. Their first record was badly reviewed in Rolling Stone and a bunch of places.
Wow.
And I was like, nah. And you know, Page had been a session musician. He had come to New York. I mean, he was well known in England as a major session musician. And Dusty Springfield, my father had recorded Dusty in Memphis, one of the great records. And she pulled a coat about Page putting the band together. And I can tell you that this sort of thing was not my father's cup of tea. He was not a loud guitar guy, okay? He was a Marshall guitar guy. And but because he knew how Dusty was totally immersed in the English rock scene, that's why the band.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Paul, I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on today's music industry, and if you have listen to any new music.
I mean, I honestly, I am so involved in what I do. Okay, now I have listened to some female hip hop recently, because mostly I listen to things that can help me. In other words, I'm trying to get a good version together on the keyboard of Duke Ellington's 1928, 26, St. Louis Toodly-Doo. It's extraordinarily difficult to play well. You know, and so that's what is helping me. I focus on things that can help me. Now, as far as today goes, I was a hip hop guy, okay? I bought Rapper's Delight 12-inch the week it came out, because Jamaicans had been rapping for 10 years before that on reggae records. And so I was familiar with the form, and I thought it had validity. And so it has influenced so many things. I mean, every K-pop record has a section where one of these K-pop artists is flowing in Korean. You know, I don't love K-pop. For me, it's well done. People love it, and it seems overproduced. To be honest with you, that's my
certainly.
I mean, that's again, this is just my feelings. Other people love it. Billions of people love it. And what am I remember I had a discussion with someone once where they were saying how all drum machines suck, and at the time, Jamaican music being made by a lot of artists and influencing hip hop and getting played in black clubs in general using drum machines. And I said, so what am I going to do? Go to a Jamaican club and get on the microphone and go, you people are idiots dancing to this music. When they're all better dancers than I could ever be. It's like,
and the drum machine is playing in better time than anyone else.
Well, that can be sterile too if it's not.
I know it can be, but it was exciting. Like when New Order came out, and you know, it's just full on solid drum machine and interesting work.
I put a drum machine on this song called Opposite Worlds when I cut a single in LA with the San Francisco punk band, the Mutants, back in 1981, 82, 81, or maybe it was 80. It was a long time ago. So I put a drum machine on a rock record because I thought it would be appropriate. There's still a live drummer. There's a mix of the two things.
Oh, cool.
And but as far, look, I know Taylor Swift is an enormous talent, okay? That she not only is a good songwriter, but that she also has incredible presence and vocal chops. And also she runs her shit like a boss. I mean, she runs her financial and her music business trip in a way that maybe only like Barbara Streisand approximated in the day, so I admire that, and I have friends who think she's a truly amazing, and I think her songwriting is really. Now, I was vacationing with our granddaughter in Ohio at this island, Kelly's Island in Lake Erie, and she brought 3 of her 13-year-old friends, and so we're driving around the property. Each one of the girls got to have this golf cart we had, and of course they'd never driven, so they were having the time of their lives.
Yeah,
and they're blasting this hip hop by these different current female artists. A lot of it was very, very blue or filthy.
Yeah.
It was very explicit.
I know.
And I said to our granddaughter, Maddie, do your parents know you're listening to this sort of thing? And she's like, yeah. And so I'm like, you know what? And I listened to it. You know what? Some of it was pretty good as far as hip hop goes. So my feeling is that I'm too focused on what I need to do next to spend a lot of time. In other words, like I try to either be writing or playing for hours every day. Or doing something involved with my craft and I hate to use the word art, but what I'm trying to do. And so any time that I would spend like going through what's going on currently would be time that I'd probably be taking away from that. Now, I mean, every once in a while I think of together a tune where I rap. I can rap Jamaican style, but I so far I haven't done it.
Yeah, you don't want to scare the people. They would be shocked. Whoa.
Yeah, throw that in the middle of your set.
Exactly. I think about it though, and maybe someday I'll do it. You never know.
Oh, that's great.
So, Paul, it was
great.
Good talking to you today.
Yeah,
it was my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Great to meet you virtually. My kitty says goodbye.
Whoever can. All right, guys, have a good one. And if I'm back in the area, I'll give you a holler.
Oh yeah. Thanks.
If I'm ever on the side of Jersey, which is definitely a possibility.
I'll buy you lunch or something.
All right, be good.
Okay, see ya. You've been listening to No Good Music. Today's interview was produced and edited by Rob J. Lilly and recorded via Zoom at the Did You Say 7 Studios in Washington, New Jersey. You can find No Good Music on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Pandora, and almost anywhere you listen to podcasts. The songs Trembling, We're Going for a Ride, She Doesn't Love Him, and Voices from the Harbor. Used with permission from Paul Wexler.